Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Improv and Money conversation. I'm Claire Westwood, and I'm an enthusiastic improviser here in Bristol. And last week, I started off a conversation on a community thread all about improv and money. And I'm just having some conversations with people just to talk about improv, money, income streams, and maybe how they can fit together. And if you're an improviser, how maybe you can monetize your love of improv as well. So today I'm talking to Paul, who put his hand up and offered to come and speak to me. So thanks for your time, Paul. It's lovely to see you.
A pleasure. No, thanks for having me.
Thank you. So do you want to talk a little bit about, just introduce people to who you are, what you do, and then we'll talk about your improv journey.
Sounds good. Yep. So my name is Paul, and I'm a head teacher of a secondary school in Bristol. So for me, my angle is very much the lens of education and the ways in which improv might be something that could be better utilised in schools more generally, or for teachers as a point of professional development, or actually as a school leader myself, just ways in which we develop leadership that way around. So yeah, that's the angle and the things that I'm particularly interested in.
Fantastic. And I know that's something a little bit that Steve talked about in the first discussion, was about taking improv into corporate environments or work environments and using it for that. So do you want to just tell us a bit about your own improv journey? Like, how did you get into improv, why you do it, and just a little bit about your improv experience?
I'm definitely at the kind of the neophyte stage in terms of my own improv journey. So I pale in comparison to people like Steve and others that you'll be talking to. So I've always enjoyed improv, and particularly I came at it through kind of podcasts and things like that. So things like Hey Riddle Riddle or Improv for Humans. And so actually, that's where my exposure particularly kind of came from.
Okay.
And then actually at university, I kind of also had a chance to kind of not dabble, but certainly watched a lot of it. So I saw the Oxford Imps, for example, in action quite a few times, and actually, a number of those went on to form Ostentatious. So kind of saw it from that angle of how you go from an idea through to fruition as well.
Okay, yeah.
In terms of getting involved more generally, so I was when I moved to Bristol, got involved through the bit. So did one or two of the intro courses, and then was very fortunate to be cast in an up show, which was Head Talks by Cat Olive a couple of years ago. Since then, have mainly been focused through the up show side of things. So I've directed Gods in the last year, but also was involved in some of the one-off things like Men, and then I've done a little bit of pieces in London as well. So I was I was second placed in the London regional heats, the London national heats of the World PowerPoint Championships, which is a particular highlight.
The dizzy heights of
Indeed.
stardom. So anybody who doesn't know, the Bit is the Bristol Improv Theatre, which is where a lot of us start our improv journeys here in Bristol, which is a centre specifically for improv. So it does improv shows, drop-ins, jams, courses, workshops, like everything improv in there. And it's a great community space, and it's where a lot of other shows get birthed from there that then go out and do their job in and around Bristol. So fantastic. So so you've kind of, so you started off with the sort of performance side and learning as a performer, and then you've moved more into the directing, producing side.
Yes, yeah. That, as much as one can say those kind of things. I mean, I'm keeping up with my cast is mainly the thing with the directing I've been doing.
Yeah, for sure. And have you had the intention of making money from your shows? Like, how do you feel about putting on shows and making money, and how they fit together, just personally?
I think at the moment where we are as a group is that we enjoy performing together, and we enjoy the show format that we've got. So if we can get to a position whereby it feeds itself, if we can make any income that then allows us to do the rehearsal side of things, that's I think where we're aiming at the moment. I don't think we've got kind of bigger plans to go beyond that, because of course just breaking through, and we're all kind of doing day jobs as well, is half the battle, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. Okay. And so you were talking earlier about using, I think it's called applied improvisation generally, in the in the general terms of like using improv for workplaces or education or that kind of thing. So what are your thoughts on that, and like what would you like to share about that?
There's a number of angles that I think are worthy of exploring further. So In education more generally, there are consistently, calls for oracy to improve, or the ways in which students express themselves. There's also wider conversations around curriculum reform, and I think that the more that we can create a sense of understanding about what improv is and how it might feed into some of those, I think that's only going to be to our wider benefit, because it's
Yeah.
both generally raising the awareness of improv as a format, as an art, and then actually, making sure that it can be utilized most properly in education that way. So I think there's a curriculum design angle. How do you actually structure and consolidate without it being too constraining? So it's not trying to do, say, the UCB manual, but it is trying to say, look, here are some formats that we could put into a school curriculum. And I think that is something that improvisers who are looking to monetize their practice, could develop schemes of work or ways in which they can be drop into to schools and run it that way. And then on the workplace side of things, it's also those ways in that it's multifaceted. Is it about just helping people develop confidence, or is it thinking on the spot, reacting to events, staying calm under pressure? There's any number of ways in which I've certainly been able to rely and fall back on my improv practice, during difficult moments, but also would recognize, my own, career progression has also probably helped me as an improviser the way around as well.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, obviously you've got both hats on, if you will. So as a head teacher and as an improviser, like what would be your like best case scenario then, as far as using improv? If we just talk about like your particular school, like how would you love to see improv utilized for your for the students there, for the staff, for like yeah, have you got any thoughts particularly based on your own personal experience?
So I think some of it's starting small. So having clubs and activities which allow students just to experience it and to buy into it as a point of volunteering. So it's mainly short form basis, because actually, some of the improv games and just the ways in which you're able to help students interact with one another, I think that's helpful for breaking down boundaries. But if I fast forward to what a best case scenario would look like, I think if we could have an embedded curriculum structure which actually talks openly around, improvisation, and that can be then it's all its forms. So that's, how that works as you're fermenting an idea and then actually hearing someone else and then responding accordingly. That might also have implications for things like, music, and actually the ways in which we use improvisation in music. But
Yeah.
I think the fundamental aspects, the listening, the considering, the building on, that being ingrained in a curriculum offering in specific subjects, but also as a thorough line. So, we have enrichment programs and ways in which that could be, facilitated that way. For staff, I think it's the CPD element, so you are looking at improv when we're kind of going through pastoral or safeguarding scenarios, and actually just putting people in the moment and saying, okay, how might you respond? What might come up for you? Again, you've got ways in which you can just help break down barriers around feedback and how difficult it can be to receive feedback. And again, improv being a conduit for that, because I've seen brilliant workshops where you can facilitate people hearing difficult things, but in a way that's less loaded, because they're more receptive to that feedback because of the exercises we've done beforehand. So I think that's where it's got a role to play for staff as well.
Yeah.
I've certainly found, as being involved in improv, even the small ways that I have, that it's a good leveler, because actually everyone's put into a situation where you're all responding to the same offer, you're all responding to the same audience suggestions, and actually helping sometimes just break past those barriers of, I need to be this place in the hierarchy in a situation, I need to be reacting in a way that is going to help me feel seen after this. Actually, improv as a technique is quite helpful for just moving away from those things that are built into us all, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. Because it's so much about being in the moment and like creating something together, that like you say, it's a very level playing field when you're doing improv, because you've all got like one goal in mind, which is to create something fun, or to create a particular sort storyline, or whatever it is that you're all working towards. And so yeah, that's really fun. And I think like when I started doing improv in my 30s, so quite a while ago now, and there's one company that I worked with, and I was a nurse for my like proper career for a long time. And that improv workshop was the first time, and I was in my 30s, where I was told it was okay not to be good at something if I'd never done it before.
Mm.
And I was like, how am I in my 30s and nobody has gone, it's all right, Claire, to be not particularly good at this. Like, they were like, don't, you know, we hear this a lot in improv, don't try and be good, don't try and be funny, don't try and be like your best, like you're just learning a new skill. And it was like mind-boggling for me, that I'd been given permission to be a bit shit. And secondly, that nobody had ever said that to me before. And I was like, I felt so liberated just by that. We're not expecting like this level of expertise straight away. And I know, like, if I talk to people and say that I do improv, and they're like, oh, I could never do that, because they imagine like the stage version or the TV version. I'm like, you know, we don't start there, right? We just start playing games in a little back room somewhere, you know, like, yeah, it's really interesting.
But I think that touches on, for us with the, working with young people and seeing it through the lens of improv is, so it's noticeable that students who are younger, buy into it far more quickly than older students, because they are still in that era of play and that
Yeah.
sense of, being able to engage with the inherent silliness that can sometimes come with improv. And actually, if we
Yeah.
can persist with it and structure it over a longer period of time, for those older students, yeah, it's helping them get out of their own heads. It's allowing them to be, silly in spaces in ways that actually, still sometimes feels, caught up in judgment. But it's
Yeah.
also, again, for the staff and for those older students, you're saying, exactly as the same I hear, that, oh, I could never do that. Conversation is improv, and actually know how we just
Totally.
help to recenter that back to them, so that the fundamental skill we want people to take away from. And I think if people are looking to develop monetary kind of streams through improv, I think we need to make sure that we don't fall back on the tropes that can sometimes happen of, improv helps develop confidence. It absolutely does, but I think there's
Yeah.
far more richness around. Improv helps us to develop listening. Improv
Yeah.
really helps us to understand other people in a different way, because
Yeah.
what that will open up in terms of ways that you can shape workshops, ways that, frankly, we can make sure that the form is taken seriously when you are trying to, develop beyond the areas and the arenas that we're in. I think that's why it's going to be particularly rich and powerful.
Yeah, totally. And I think for me, when I started it, I've always been quite a playful comedic person, but it was like being given permission to really embrace that side of myself. And also for me as well, which I think is very common with a lot of people who have come from, academic backgrounds or places where we're rewarded for learning and knowing stuff. It's like getting away from the overthinking, because when you're like creating, like you have an idea and you have to get it out like that, like there's no time for overthinking. And almost like that was such a relief for me to go, I don't need to plan this for 3 weeks, because I literally have to do it now. So yeah, there's definitely lots of benefits. And there's, coming from a health background, but there's lots of health benefits to laughing and playing and having fun, and just everything's, lots of things talking about mental health and mental wellness now, and just like, yeah, tapping into that playfulness and letting go of having to be perfect or having to be right or having to be something, very curated or, Instagrammable that we have now, or any of this. And it's just like, that's that's not, yeah. Yeah, there's absolutely, yeah, there's loads of ways it could help. So I mean, the big question if we talk about money is like, is there a budget for any of this in schools? That's the question.
Um, there is, but I think it's how one is framing what the use will be. So,
Yeah.
it's obviously challenging times in education in terms of where budget is spent, and it's not about how do we then fit the model just to make sure you can get the income, but actually, there will always be money in schools when it comes to how we facilitate, the pastoral resilience of our young people. So the skills that help them to, handle setbacks and difficulties. And there's absolutely a way that one can frame the use of improv there. There's a reasonably strong overlap in terms of, we've had people who've worked in my school, for example, who've come from improv backgrounds, who then worked in and moved into counselling and drama therapy. And again, there's a route in that respect. If people are interested in this as a field, that might be
Yeah.
an avenue for further exploration. But I think the two ways in which you might want to shape it would be, here is a kind of curriculum offer. It's maybe a 6-session, set of resources that you can then make available at a price point you think is worthwhile. So that might be, a few £100 or several £1,000s, depending on the amount of time that goes into it. Obviously, at the larger end of things, that might come with training workshops and ways in which you're developing the teachers so that they're also upskilling and able to deliver that content as best you can. Then you might also have it on the other side, which is then more bespoke workshops and actually things, whether that's for students or staff. So, there was a school, it was a school in London, Putney, which about a decade ago now, they made the national news because they used Hoopla to do some workshops with their students, which was, again, developing for the students that confidence. I think it was great for Hoopla. I think for the school itself, it was more kind of, it was a good exercise, but I think it was also about how could they make a headline around these things.
Yeah.
But actually, I think there is something around, okay, how might you approach schools and say, we'd love to work with a particular year group. So that might be years 10 and 11 when they're slightly kind of older and actually more likely to be caught up in their own minds and actually how they are, seeing themselves in relation to others. And again, a workshop for a day could be anything from 250 up to £1,000, depending on how many students you're working with and how you want to work with there. So again, it will depend on what you're looking to offer and how that develops. Of course, if you are doing the in-person workshops, that comes into the conversations with the school around any kind of insurance conversations. You don't necessarily have to be DBS checked because you'll usually be supervising those things, but it would be helpful if you were part of the DBS update service, because again, the more that you can make it seamless for a school to go in and deliver something, I think the better round. And I would say that in terms of having it being taken, when I say being taken seriously, I don't mean that in a pejorative sense. I think it's just how we break through sometimes those who have a particular view of improv. But I think conversations and maybe even more lecture formats for parents to explain and explore the history of improv, the importance of it, and actually why it's worthwhile that their daughters have done these workshops, or their sons are doing these workshops. I think that's also something to consider.
Yeah, so like structuring it in a way where the value is more obvious for people who aren't enthusiastic improvisers. And also bearing in mind, it's in a school setting. I mean, the other thing that I'm thinking of as well, because I know people who do, after school clubs with sort of creativity, like hands-on creativity, or I've seen ones around that do, they go in and kind of do science club, but in a more kind of playful, creative way. So, is that another kind of potential thing for sort of an after school introduction to improv?
After school is definitely an option. I think there's two angles. I think for primary school settings, after school could be offered, but you also then again into the child protection side of things. That tends to be where it's at least more structured, though, because most schools in the primary setting will have a paid for after school service, and therefore improv could be something that is part of that. For secondary schools, after school tends to be more kind of supervised by staff, and then it's offering as an extracurricular activity. So in those regards, you'd have to be looking at it from a cost perspective of, okay, how could I make this straightforward for the school but not at a cost that they're going to balk at? Because actually running the football team after school be free because I'll be using a PE teacher or a member of staff who's a footballer. But again, if there are ways in which there are building out of institutions like the Bristol Improv Theatre, courses that could allow teachers to then run improv in their own settings, I think that's maybe a good area to explore as well. Because actually, if I could do a 6-week course that comes with whatever accreditation would be helpful, but at least develop a confidence to then go back into my own school, that's good proactive kind of professional development for teachers as well. It means that then they can offer it at a different cost to their own school rather than it being an assumed cost the other way around.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So training the staff to fulfill the course rather than running courses. Okay, fantastic. So great. This conversation has been very different to what I expected, but it's all really interesting. I'm really glad I asked the question last week because I think some really juicy stuff's coming out. So is there anything else that you want to share or talk about regarding improv, money, school, your own personal journey that we haven't covered?
I think from a curriculum perspective, if you were going to try and pull something together, it's always worthwhile kind of comparing notes to colleagues in schools, because actually, kind of seeing how that progression looks and what that looks like, rather than just kind of creating something that would work in an improv only setting and then, trying to transpose it to schools. So I know there's, a number of people in education who'd be very happy to help on those fronts. I think on the workplace side of things, you know, schools are a rich source when it comes to that professional development, and actually that's something that I would always encourage people to approach and to talk through, because you know, I think there's a whole range of people who, you know, teaching is improv in many respects. You are having to
Yeah.
respond to what's going on in front of you in the class. I think that's where
Yeah.
there's a lot I have learned from people like you know, from Steve or Jack or others that, you know, have helped me as a teacher and leader as well. So that's
Yeah.
absolutely something I'd encourage that way around. More holistically, when it comes to the money side, you know, and to the thread that we were part of, I think it's trying to work through, you know, as a community, are we looking to monetize the best of the whole community, and what does that look like compared to actually, you know, each individual strand and stream and individuals within it looking, because those are two very different conversations, aren't they? And you
Yeah.
know, I think
Yeah.
a rich debate and conversation we had around that.
Yeah, and I think, you know, the conversations that were started were very much both of those things, as in individuals going, okay, if I'm producing a show, there's ways that I can maybe promote it, market it to get more people in, so therefore the money flows more, and that's one intention. But also, yeah, just igniting this whole conversation as a community thing of going, we're all really passionate about improv, and you know, if we could get it out to more people and get paid for it as well, then you know we're all winning, in my opinion, in a way. But doing that obviously, you know, mindfully in organizations like yourselves that has certain structures, and yeah, safeguarding issues and all that kind of stuff involved. But yeah, that's fantastic. Well, thank you so much for your time this morning. It's been really really good talking to you, and thanks to everybody watching, and we'll do another conversation very soon. Bye.